in the village of Harlem. We've been here, this will be our 200th year. And we've always been a church that stands for and cares for people on the margins, people who are poor. And we are very excited to host you all. We call ourselves the We're Not Afraid Church, and we're here to stand with you. So thank you all for turning out tonight, and I turn it over to your wonderful leaders.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So my name is Ellie McCrow, and I'll be chairing tonight's rally with my co-chair, Joyce Butler from the People's Power Assembly in Baltimore. So I'm a member of the organizing committee for Pratt Workers United, and we just recently won our union election with 218 votes to 12, and so that's that's a struggle that I've been involved with, and we have to report that was victorious, and that's just work. Fighting for library workers has sort of helped us. That's sort of the thing that I do to help fight for folks on the margins as well. So I'll stop rambling. Okay, so Joyce, you can go ahead.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening. It may be a little cold in here tonight, but we are going to warm this room up with our spirit. Yes. St. Mary serves the people. So it doesn't get a lot of money from big corporate donors, but we don't care. Everybody say, ain't no stopping us now. Ain't no stopping us now. Yes, indeed. We've gathered this weekend to revive the fighting legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, who laid his life down to fight racism, poverty, and yes, war too, especially U.S. imperialism. It is my pleasure, my complete pleasure, to introduce Reverend Annie Chambers, straight out of Baltimore. She is the National Welfare Rights Union co-chair, public housing advocate, and founding member of the People's Power Assembly. Ladies and gentlemen, Reverend Annie Chambers.
Turn it up real quick.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It's evening now. I'm so glad to be here with you and grateful to the power on high for allowing me to still be in the fight after 62 years. And continue. Well, when I was asked to speak, I always pray on my speeches, and especially about the war and the things that go on. Let me tell you, we live in one of the most warmongering countries in the world.
Amen.
And that's America. We forever, let me stop saying we, because I'm not a part of this garbage. But America goes around stealing, killing, and robbing all over the world. And now we're in a dilemma that while we should be trying to talk peace and help make peace, and we're in the situation that we can't do it in this country, we talking about war. We're giving out mass destruction, war, material to other countries to kill and to just rob and to do the things that we're doing. When they asked me about the war, I said, let me tell y'all something. I've been at war. I think I come out my mother fighting. Because America, my war has always been fighting for justice right here in America. Yeah. We need to talk about, we got billions to spend to give someone to fight a war. And I'm talking about Ukraine right now. Okay, I'm being open. We got billions to spend. And people falling dead in the street from COVID. People falling dead in the street now from the conditions of no housing, no food, and we living in America. Right. How do we even point our fingers at another country or anywhere and say you are bruising your people when America, this country is the biggest abusers and capitalists in the world. America is the biggest capitalist country. We will sell our mothers for $1. We will sell our mothers for $1. We have, got to stand up against this war machine that's coming up now. And we got, I know we're close to Dr. King's birthday, but y'all know what really, we were out there fighting and marching. And what really threatened him was when Dr. King spoke out against the Vietnam War. When he spoke out against the war, then he had stepped on the carpetbagger's big money. And that's why, he got killed. That's why Dr. King got killed. It was all right while we were saying, let us sit beside you. Let us get some education. Let us be able to do these things. There were, some of them were, we with you, they come in the back door, talk their little back door guy. But once he stood up and showed what America was about, and how to greed in America, then Dr. King got killed. And every time we go into a battle, we send in our children, and I'm talking about working class and poor children, die. Not many rich people children die in the war, because they can always get their children out or get them little plush jobs in, the war. But I said to you let me finish with this. I'm a mother, a grandmother, a great-grandmother, a great-great-grand. I'm a grandmother 4 times old. And I have said to my grandchildren now, because my children too old. That's how old I am. I know they ain't gonna do it. Not one of y'all should be prepared to go and put on a uniform. That's right. Not one. You want to fight? Your grandmother is still out here fighting every day in the street. Fighting for justice. Fighting for that you may have liberty right here in your country. Right. Your country. So if you want to fight, and that's what we should tell our young people. Because who benefits from the war? Right. We don't. We lose our loved ones. We get, the food is astronomical. People can't even buy food right now. Every day people is asking me for food, clothing. Can you help me get somewhere to live? We got more homeless people than we ever had, even during the Depression. So if we want to say, let's stand up, and with this we must say, no more war. and let this country know, and let old Sleepy Joe know, that we won't die. Send Hunter over there and let him die. Or whatever, what is that other boy he got named? I don't know. Send him and let him over there. You see, because it is our children that's dying. Yes. And I want to thank you for listening to me tonight. And I want to thank you for inviting me to New York. And that I was able to come. And I really want to thank a friend of mine. He was a very young, well, he was not a little kid running around, but he was a teenager when we met. And that's been over 52 years ago. Carlos, whenever I come to New York, he's always there, along with my son Angel, that I stole from him. You know, he stole one of my children also. My daughter Dina, she tells everybody Carlos her father. So we are family. So I want to thank my family here in New York. I want to thank all of y'all for listening to me. And please call me and invite me back again. But let's end with this. No more war!
No more war! No more war!
America, get yourself together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reverend Chambers. Okay, our next speaker is Melinda Butterfield, a Struggle Lucha co-editor and author of U.S. Proxy War in Ukraine and Donbass.
Good evening, friends, siblings, and comrades. Tonight I'd like to take you on a little thought experiment. First, I want you to imagine that there's been a far-right takeover of the U.S. government, supported by violent white supremacists. Sadly, that's pretty easy to imagine these days. Next, I want you to imagine that people all over the country rose up to protest against this coup. Black and white, Latinx, Asian and Indigenous and Arab, LGBTQ people, immigrants and prisoners. But just as this anti-fascist movement seemed to be gaining strength, a terrible massacre of activists takes place, let's say in Philadelphia, where resistance has been very deep and strong for many years. The resistance is brutally repressed in most of the U.S. Some people are killed, many are imprisoned, and thousands have to flee abroad or risk death. However, let's imagine in 2 states, the anti-fascist movement successfully seizes control and holds it. For the sake of argument, let's say these states are New York and Connecticut. The new U.S. government sends in troops and tanks to overthrow this haven. But the community, us, we organize ourselves and manage to push them back. Now a long-term standoff ensues. Many of the threatened activists from around the country come to New York and Hartford to help strengthen the resistance. Now imagine this state of affairs continues for 9 years. Trade and supplies for New York and Connecticut are cut off from the rest of the continental U.S. and Canada. Hartford, because of its location inland, is relatively sheltered from attack. But New York City is shelled with artillery from across the Hudson on a daily basis, targeting apartment buildings, schools, hospitals, and places of worship, like this one. Death squads and armed drones are regularly sent in to infiltrate and carry out attacks on the residents. Overseas allies of the regime in Washington send it more and more weapons. Over time, the number of federal troops surrounding our little haven grows. The regime in Washington also hates Mexico and is constantly trying to provoke a military conflict with our neighbors to the south. Also, not a far-fetched scenario. Mexico is the only country that offers support to the anti-fascists in Connecticut and New York. In fact, the Mexican government tries to broker a peace agreement. But despite its promises, Washington keeps bombing New York City week after week, year after year. According to them, all of us, we're nothing but pawns of the evil Mexican government. This imaginary scenario is one I hope will never come to pass. But I ask you to consider it because I want everyone, just for a few minutes, to put yourselves in the shoes of people living in the Donbass, the former eastern regions of Ukraine called Donetsk and Lugansk. What I just described is reality for people living there since a US-backed coup overthrew Ukraine's elected government 9 years ago in 2014. Now let me tell you about a dear friend of mine in Donetsk named Sveta. I haven't seen her and her husband for a few years, since before the latest escalation in the war. She's one of the most courageous people I've ever known. Sveta is a socialist, a feminist and labor activist who grew up in Donbass, but later moved west to Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital. In 2014, after the coup, she had to flee Kyiv under threat of arrest or death because of her socialist beliefs. Her husband, Denis, is a Jewish union organizer whose family is from Western Ukraine, and if anything, he was even in greater danger. Sveta and Denis settled back in Donetsk and have lived there through years and years of Ukraine's bombing war. Today, Denis is enlisted in the Donetsk People's Militia to protect the people of Donbass, as are many other exiles from central and western Ukraine. While some people have fled the bombing to go eastward into Russia, Sveta has stayed in the city to care for her elderly father. Almost every day, she posts updates on the situation there. Over the past year, they've grown increasingly heartbreaking. Even her incredible inner strength has been ground down to the bone by the unrelenting Ukrainian attacks on civilians, on her neighbors, on the streets she has to travel for food, medicine, and water. Yes, water, because people have to severely ration water since Ukraine cut off the city's main source. Every time it seems like there might be an end to this nightmare in sight, a new, more powerful weapons system supplied by the United States and NATO gets into the hands of the neo-Nazi Azov Brigade and other Ukrainian military forces north and west of the city. Just yesterday, a grocery warehouse in Donetsk was attacked with NATO-supplied weapons, killing a worker and wounding 4 others. One of the Ukrainian regime's worst crimes started this past summer. Their army began scattering small landmines called petals all over the city. They're about the size of the palm of your hand. They're colored and shaped to look like leaves. If you step on one, you may die, but you're pretty much guaranteed to be left maimed and disabled. The majority of those who have fallen victim have been seniors and emergency workers, and some children too. As of December 21st, there were 87 recorded victims of the petals. The countdown to World War III started long before Russia intervened to protect Donbass last February. People in Donetsk and Lugansk, like people in Yemen and Palestine and North Africa, are guinea pigs for testing US weapons. In the event of a nuclear exchange, they will be the first to die. The avowed policy of the Ukrainian government since 2014 has been to take back the region and cleanse it of the majority Russian-speaking population. The guiding hand behind all of this has been the US government, under both Democrats and Republicans, politicians from both parties in Congress. Building a true anti-war movement here starts with poor and working people recognizing that it's not in our interests, that the $113 billion spent on the U.S. proxy war in Ukraine last year alone is money stolen from our pockets, money that's desperately needed to address the crises of inflation, homelessness, poverty, lack of a public health care system, and climate catastrophe. We have our own battles to fight here, don't we? Against poverty, against racist police killings, which you probably missed it because it wasn't well reported, but were the highest ever recorded last year. Against the terrible attacks on voting rights of people of color, women's reproductive freedom, and the right of trans people like me just to exist. But to be effective, the anti-war movement must be built on a foundation of solidarity with the people directly affected as well. And those residents of Donbass and those exiled Ukrainians have been completely written out of the U.S. narrative about this war, and sadly also by many existing anti-war groups. Solidarity isn't a one-way street. Earlier generations learned so much from the struggles of people in Vietnam, Central America, and Iraq. Today, when organized fascist groups are growing more threatening in this country, we need to learn from the people of Donbass and their nearly decade-long resistance to fascism. Because to paraphrase those powerful words of Dr. Martin Luther King, the bombs dropped abroad also explode here at home. They destroy the dream and possibility of a decent life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melinda. Please see the literature table over there to sign up to get a copy of U.S. Proxy War in Ukraine and Donbass by Melinda here. It tells the truth about the roots of the present war and much, much more, so please, help get it out.
Down with white supremacy! Down with white supremacy! Down with white supremacy! Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is the outspoken critic of U.S. imperialism and white supremacy, Margaret Kimberly, executive editor, Black Agenda Report. Ladies and gentlemen, Margaret Kimberly.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I was debating whether to take my big signs, but I'm going to, yes, if you could. Yes, just open it. There we go. NATO equals white supremacy. And that's our message from Black Alliance for Peace. We are fighting white supremacy, and, people sometimes think that it's some, knuckle dragger who ran into the Capitol on January 6th. But we're talking about the whole system, from the Congress, to the President, to the Pentagon, to the banks, to the military, industrial complex. Thank you. You don't have to, yes. I'm not going to have you stand there. Thanks, guys. So good evening, and power to the people. Power to the people. Power to the people. Power to the people. I have so many great memories of being here in St. Mary's Church. It's been a few years, obviously, since before the pandemic. I'm thinking of my mentor and comrade, the late Glenn Ford, and other folks who've, St. Mary's welcomes, as we've already heard, welcomes the people into this house. This is the beginning of the Martin Luther King birthday celebration weekend. Yes, give it up. And we have his photo on the flyer, of course, and this is just one action among a week of actions called for by the United National Anti-War Coalition. But a lot of people claim to honor Dr. King when they do nothing of the sort. On Monday, when his birthday is celebrated, community centers and churches will be packed with politicians who've helped to increase our military budget to more than $800 billion, which is about half, some say a majority, of all discretionary spending. But we're not like that. We're here to declare our opposition to those things that King opposed. We don't care that one of the people who looks like him is the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin. We aren't impressed when the killers in chief are black. We've seen that movie and we know how it ends. But if we're going to call for actions in King's name, we must be as uncompromising as he was. And we have another opportunity in a few months to remind the world of what he meant. On April 4th, 1967, King spoke at the Riverside Church, which is just a few blocks from here. And on that day, he publicly broke with President Lyndon Johnson and opposed the Vietnam War. He was vilified for doing that. All the people, that's another thing, claimed they loved King. When he was alive, they had nothing good to say about him. Even some of his colleagues said that's not the smart thing to do, to go up against the president. So the least we can do for claiming to remember him and honor him is to be uncompromising as well. At the time he was alive, he spoke of human needs which went unmet because of defense spending, which at that juncture was a lot smaller than it was now, but a lot has happened in the last 50 years. I lost my spot. Neoliberalism has taken a firm hold on this country, and the lords of finance capital have complete control of the government. And austerity, which is not just spending less on the people, but making their immiseration, impoverishing them, actually being public policy. The end result is that the U.S. has spent $100 billion and counting on funding, mostly for defense, to use Ukraine as a proxy weapon against Russia. When King was alive, there was still a Soviet Union, but it was destroyed, and the collective West, as it is called, has been dedicated to weakening Russia and making it a cash cow to be stripped of its resources and assets. And thus we have a deadly conflict in Ukraine, where, as Melinda said, thousands of people have died since 2014, when the Obama administration and right-wing forces in that country overthrew the elected president. And many people have died in the ensuing war and attacks on the Donbass, which happened far before February 2022. But there's a frenzy of war propaganda in Washington, such as we saw with Zelensky's recent speech in Congress. Very little, if anything, is said about the people's needs. To my knowledge, Joe Biden has not spoken once on the issue of the unhoused across the country. But there's no big secret about how to address that crisis. Build houses. But a country where Raytheon rules is not going to house poor people. And the system functions as it was set up to function. So reformism is a dead end. And so is expecting the electoral process to work for the people. I find it funny that liberals and progressives sneer at the right-wing Republicans who held up the vote for Speaker to make sure their demands were met. Now, these people don't want anything I want, but apparently neither do members of Congress who claim to want what I want. Every time they have the opportunity to speak up on behalf of things they claim to care about, they don't. And I say this to say we know not to put our faith in them. We put faith in ourselves and our organization, which is why we're here tonight. Militarism, including the existence of 800 U.S. bases around the world, doesn't just cost us money. It doesn't just pollute the planet, although it does those things. but it brings the killing home. This week, a video showing police in Los Angeles tasing and killing a black man has gone viral.
Yeah.
I personally don't watch those. I find them traumatizing, frankly. And I think they lead people to believe that these are rare events when they aren't. According to the website Mapping Police Violence, more than 1,100 people were killed by police in 2022, an average of 3 every day. So this should not be shocking, just like mass shootings should not be shocking. It isn't possible for the U.S. to be the hyper-violent global policeman without that violence coming home. We know about the 1033 program, which sends surplus military equipment to police departments all over the country. And that is something the system put in place to keep black people, especially black people, policed. And that's why we need a revolution of values, as King told us, before we can change anything else. In addition to being the executive editor of Black Agenda Report, I'm a coordinating committee member of Black Alliance for Peace. BAP is clear about what ails this country. We're an anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist formation. And we don't just say that $100 billion should not go to Ukraine. We say that NATO and the EU are white supremacist formations, with their very existence threatening the planet. It's funny, the NA and NATO is supposed to be North Atlantic, but NATO and the EU recently declared that they will address, quote, the challenges of China, unquote. I guess they're actually being honest for once. They're imperialist structures who work alongside the US and think they have a right to go anywhere on the planet and interfere anywhere they want. BAP has said NATO is an illegitimate, aggressive structure in the service of Western imperialism and does not deserve any support from African, black, and colonized people, unquote. Last week, the NATO General Secretary, Mr. Stoltenberg, actually said, weapons are in fact the way to peace. I guess he read Orwell before he spoke. But anyway, I'm summing up now, my friends, and saying we know that the oligarchy rules here. And that's why we have all these ills that I mentioned. But I don't say that to imply that we should give up. We didn't come here tonight to be defeatist, but to be clear that we must be revolutionary. We don't have a choice. Dr. King told us that. Thank you so much.
We are honored that David Clinton, actor and activist, was able to fly from Los Angeles to be here with us. He has a long history of standing up for what is right in Hollywood, which isn't always an easy thing to do.
Mendacity. Am I reaching to the back? Can you hear me in the back? Mendacity. For me, the big story of 2022 was not the war in Ukraine. The big story was this overpowering, overwhelming tide of official mendacity about the war. And that mendacity was faithfully conveyed and amplified by the corporate mass media. I'm a creature of the media myself. When I act in a movie or a TV show, I get a paycheck from some big media conglomerate. Sometimes I get a paycheck from a company called NBC Universal, which includes Universal Studios in North Hollywood, California, and the huge network of NBC, including the cable news channel MSNBC. By the way, Universal Studios, NBC Universal, made John Carpenter's classic cult movie, The Thing. That's an important piece of trivia. Now that same corporation, NBC Universal, that pays me to act in fictional shows, that same corporation is paying Rachel Maddow and Joy Reid and Ari Melber and Lawrence O'Donnell, paying them to tell stories that are not supposed to be fictional, like my stories. And a lot of my friends are addicted to MSNBC. Official imperial mendacity. The Bible calls it bearing false witness.
Yeah, that's what it's called.
It starts in some corner of the White House, the State Department, the CIA, somewhere in the neocon deep state. Some official of the empire proclaims that day's story, and the story, including the lies, is polished and embellished and amplified and broadcast by my fellow NBC Universal performers, Rachel, Joy, Chuck Todd, Nicole Wallace, Ali Velshi, and so many others. They call it perception management. And perception management works on something called narrative control. I'm going to borrow from the Australian journalist Caitlin Johnstone. We are swimming, not quite drowning, in a sea of the most sophisticated and expansive mass-scale perception management operation that has ever been devised. January 2022, 1 year ago, I'm watching the approach of disaster, like an oncoming train bearing down on me and all of us, suspecting that this looming disaster could still be avoided, easily avoided, but witnessing that hardening intransigence of Antony Blinken, Joe Biden, and every single talking head on MSNBC and CNN, daring Russia to take action, forcing Russia to make an impossible choice. But that wasn't the official story. Perception management. Our government, our media, managing how we perceive things, especially the way we see the crisis in Ukraine. They say, let us, your government, your media, New York Times, MSNBC, let us tell you the real story. We got the best narratives. We got the best writers. We give you narratives that are compelling and easy to swallow. And they were good at it. And I had to wonder, am I crazy? Am I having a mental breakdown? Because I'm seeing two dramatically different realities clashing. I was born in 1943, so I experienced some earlier wartime propaganda campaigns, and they were pretty impressive. Vietnam. Regime change in Chile, 1973. Central America, Iraq, Afghanistan, Iraq again, Iraq. State-of-the-art propaganda in 2002 and 3. Weapons of mass destruction, WMD, the secret program to develop weapons of mass destruction by the evil Iraqis. Hiding the secret WMD program from UN inspectors, the smoking gun mushroom cloud, and always the evil villain, Saddam Hussein, Saddam, and then Saddam, Hitler, Saddam, Hitler. Jump to 2022. The videos of the war in Ukraine were grim, but what was truly terrifying for me was to be closed inside, trapped inside a false reality which kept telling me that the horror of war had to be blamed on Russia and its insane, satanic, tyrannical despot, Putin. Putin, the autocrat Putin. Putin, the all-powerful dictator, the incarnation of evil, insane Putin. Putin, Hitler. Hitler. Putin, Hitler. The sheer pervasiveness and total consistency of U.S. imperial mass media propaganda was unprecedented in my lifetime. 2022 was unique. It was the year of the greatest triumph of perception management and narrative control. George Orwell would have been impressed, maybe even astonished at what they pulled off. And remember, the foundation for this propaganda coup had already been laid beginning on the night Hillary Clinton lost her presidential bid to Donald Trump. That foundation was Russiagate. Rachel Maddow, the godmother of Russiagate. Congressman Adam Schiff, the official promulgator of Russiagate. Russiagate. I had to keep asking myself, am I just a lone dupe, a victim of Russian propaganda? Am I the only one who sees something different from what the media are telling me to see, what I'm supposed to be seeing? Am I alone in thinking, wait a minute, this doesn't add up? Well, we're going about our lives under the Stephen King science fiction dome of mendacity. Bob Dylan, the princess and the prince discuss what is real and what is not. What is real? What is not? Well, thanks to publications like Struggle La Lucha, thanks to the United National Anti-War Coalition, thanks to the Black Alliance for Peace, thanks to Covert Action Magazine, thanks to individuals like Alexander Mercouris and Garland Nixon and Ray McGovern and Scott Ritter and many others, thanks to all of them, I know that I am not alone, and you know that you are not alone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry, I'm getting it mixed up.
No worries. Our next speaker is Omowale Clay. He is the leader of the December 12th movement that, among many things, has spearheaded the work against sanctions in Zimbabwe. He has stood up for the rights of workers here and abroad. Ladies and gentlemen, Omowale Clay.
Testing, okay.
There you go.
Yes.
At the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farms. Not only that, today many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. Now, this is what we are faced with, and this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington in this campaign, we are coming to get our check.
Peace, comrades. How are you tonight? I can't hear you. How are you tonight? First, let me start by saying, no, I am not the leader of the December 12th movement. That is still in the hands of our chairperson, Viola Plummer. who brings you her spirited revolutionary unity. But before I start my comments, I certainly thought we should hear Dr. King in his own words, in his call at this point in his life for the righteousness of reparations for black people. And as I looked at the flyer that was publicized about tonight's program, I noticed there was an issue around with King for jobs, for health care, for housing, but I think it's critically important to make reparations for black people an integral part of our political programs. The December 12th movement just celebrated its 35th anniversary. We believe it is a proud history, and I just want to tell you, I'm so happy to be standing here in St. Mary's Church, because part of our history was right here in St. Mary's Church, which was under the leadership of Father Castle. Father Castle was a great humanitarian, a great progressive comrade, and so many of the programs we had here, my goodness, one of the founders of the December 12th movement, Sonny Abubadika Carson, had a meeting with King Tone, who was head of the Latin Kings, when they were trying to build a truce in terms of the gang stuff going on. Sonny was an OG. So King Tone sought him out to negotiate some contradictions between gangs in the Bronx. It was right here in St. Mary's Church. It was here at St. Mary's Church where we had started a program called Jazz Comes to Harlem. And we had a number of jazz shows right here that has eventually turned into our 28th year of our jazz spot in Sister's Place in Brooklyn, 28 years. But it started right here at St. Mary's Church. There were so many programs that we were able to have here under Father Castle's leadership. So I always wanted to just mention that, because Father Castle, I used to tease him, you know, he was in a Paul Newman movie too, you know. I don't know if you ever knew that. Father Castle, you remember that? He was in a Paul Newman movie. But a tremendous humanitarian and progressive. And I just wanted to say those few words because it's been such a long time since I've been within these walls of St. Mary's Church. And I want people to know what a long history that St. Mary's Church has had in the struggle for human rights and workers' rights for our people in this country. So I just want to say that. So for Father Castle and St. Mary's Church. So, we're kind of preaching to the choir. But let me say, these are the worst of times, but these are the best of times. For revolutionaries, these are the best of times, because the contradictions have gotten so sharp now. They're becoming clearer and clearer who are our friends, who are our enemies, who are our strategic allies, and the work we have to do in the streets, in the factories, the service industries, where workers are today. So let me begin by just contributing to the program this evening on two issues. One, on the question of, well, maybe 2.5 issues. One, on the question of reparations. Has to be an integral part of the struggle. Black people have the right to reparations. We have to fight for it. But our position is that reparations is a revolutionary question, because this imperial country is never going to give us reparations. But the demand for reparations is a revolutionary call. Yeah. The demand for reparations is a human rights call. And it's a very important one that has great ferment among the black community and our struggle for self-determination. Our position around the reparations question, because all questions come under the attack of the US government and all of its intelligence agencies. They tried to turn the reparations question in on itself. You have people like, and organizations like ADOS, who wants to divide the reparations question around and only these black people can get it and those black people can't get it. We ain't got shit, and they talking about who's getting it. You know? That's right. We have people who want to get money to do studies, you know? Give me millions of dollars so we can do studies on whether we were slaves. Our position has been tactically that we have been organizing since we held the first United States reparations rally back in early 2000 in Washington, D.C., that we are calling for an executive order by the president for a down payment on reparations. And I say a down payment so that something can become accomplishable, something that some people can actually grasp, and that the focus of that down payment be on black health care. And that be the focus for $50 billion aimed toward the black community in terms of health care. And that's one of the struggles we've taken up and are working on. The second one has been on the question of, in our community, our kids can get a gun faster than their parents can get an apartment. And where do these guns come from? We're not Smith & Wesson, we're not Glock, you know. Believe me, every gun show down south, they have ATF agents and FBI agents, all, in fact, they're some of the ones that are vendors. So these high quality weapons that are flooding our community are part of a strategic plan for fratricide inside our community, but most importantly, to raise the call for safety and for the police increase. And so now we have a cop in City Hall, you know, a cop. Somebody told me the other day, he's actually Bloomberg's fourth term, one of his major advisors. But the bottom line is, so what do we do about that? December 12th in the streets in Bed-Stuy for the past year and a half have been in the streets every week, many days, talking to our young people, talking to our adults. Oh, I'm sorry, got it. And one of the things we fought for that just recently, even the DA said, shootings in Bed-Stuy have reduced by 42%. And we're claiming that shit from our work. And let me just finish by saying, you know, this past summer, we were at the Congress of ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe. And let me just say very quickly that when the United States called for unity among African countries to support their war in the Ukraine, they were fooled, because they think we're still fools to believe that everything that they do is not just sugar-coated bullets. And so they were shocked to find out that African leaders, a significant number, said we're not down with that, because China and Russia have actually been doing concrete things to help build up our infrastructure. And Zimbabwe has played a leadership role in that. And because of that leadership role, the African Union and the Southern African Development Community have demanded that the sanctions on Zimbabwe be removed. So I just want to say those things to you this evening. Fight on. The struggle is in the streets. Never give up. These are the worst of times, but for revolutionaries, these are the best of times. Thank you.
We are especially honored to call on John Parker, who traveled to Donbass as part of a fact-finding trip to bust the big business media lies. He was literally at the front lines of war, and many of us at home were worried for his safety. He has been on a national tour. Parker is the founder of the Harriet Tubman Center for Social Justice and a national organizer for the Socialist Unity Party.
Take this up because I'm pretty far away from everybody. So, but over Wally, I know where we can get that $50 billion from. Melinda, you said $113 billion for Ukraine for white supremacy and war. There you go. 7 days prior to February 22nd, the Ukrainian military had increased their bombing of the Donbass region 20-fold and had amassed 150,000 troops ready to commit genocide. That is undeniable. And the only thing that stopped that genocidal massacre was the Russian intervention that was requested by both the Lugansk People's Republic and the Donetsk People's Republic. But in spite of stopping a massacre, which is kind of important, we're being told that we should condemn Russia for various things, and one of them being maybe they helped unify Europe. Well, regarding that, Thierry Meyssan, who used to be a political consultant for Syria and Libya, so he's kind of an insider in geopolitics. He's also the founder of Voltaire Network, which is a very good source for news. It comes out of France. He wrote an interesting editorial titled, "The World Order Already Changed in 2022. Now he writes, "Everyone is now beginning to think for themselves. We are not yet in the multipolar world that Russia and China are trying to bring about, but we are seeing it being built. It all started with the Russian military operation to enforce Security Council Resolution 2202 and protect the entire Ukrainian population from its integral nationalist government." Now, why is he saying that? Well, he goes on to mention the former European colonial African states who now want the Russian army to ensure their security. They reflect the view of much of the world that is fed up with the U.S. war on terrorism, that is actually creating and supporting terrorists in their countries when it suits them. They are also concerned about the huge transfer of weapons destined for Ukraine, but winding up on shopping sites for terrorists on the dark web because of the corruption of Kiev. Now, India and Iran are working hard with Russia to build a transport corridor that will allow them to trade despite the US and Western Europeans' illegal economic sanctions. Already, Mumbai is connected to southern Russia, and soon to Moscow and St. Petersburg. Beijing is building roads in Eurasia from east to west. None of these relationships are imperialist relationships. They are not exporting capital. They are helping developing countries build up their infrastructure for mutually beneficial economic interests, unlike the financial gangsters of the West, like the IMF and World Bank. See, if the glasses you wear only direct the light into your eyes from Europe, giving a Eurocentric view of the world, you don't see the global South. You don't see that countries in Africa, Latin America, and Asia have a different view and collectively can have even more of an impact on the world than Europe. But I don't want to give the impression that Europe is united either. Back in August, veteran journalist and TV host Saeed Naqvi wrote in the Indian Observer about French President Macron's leaked conversations displaying anything but unity, but for once, honesty. He said basically that the Western hegemony may be coming to an end. France, the UK, and USA, he said, contributed to the world in this way. France is culture, England is industry, and America is war. He then criticized wrong choices made by a series of US presidents from Clinton on. He also said China and Russia have achieved great success over the years under different leadership styles. Then mentioned how China lifted 700 million people out of poverty. But in France, he said, the market economy is increasing income inequality at an unprecedented rate. Ouch. Woo. Macron is no anti-imperialist now. He refused to take down statues of colonialists and brags about France's possessions of French Guyana. So he's not cheering on an end to hegemony. He's crying about it. He's crying about it and blaming the U.S. administrations from Clinton to Biden for ruining the party. And did you hear what Biden said when Zelensky was here in December? It's crazy. In response to a Ukrainian reporter's question about why the U.S. isn't arming Ukraine with even more advanced weaponry, he said, quote, "The idea that we would give Ukraine material that is fundamentally different than is already going there would have a prospect of breaking up NATO and breaking up the European Union and the rest of the world." Hey, it gets better. Quote, "I've spent several hundred hours face to face with our European allies and the heads of state of those countries and making the case as to why it is overwhelmingly in their interest that they continue to support Ukraine." Talk about arm twisting. Then he said, They're not looking to go to war with Russia. They're not looking for a third world war. Well, how dare they? Well, he finished up this fiasco by saying this. He said, "There's more to say, but I've probably already said too much." Yep, dummy, you did. Now, when you dig even deeper into Europe, you see the tens of maybe now hundreds of thousands demonstrating in Europe against their resources being squandered for a U.S. war in Ukraine, and upset about their gas prices and general inflation going up. See, when we talk about unity, we also can't give the impression that it's just the ruling class dynamics that matter. More importantly, it's what's going on with the working class, which, like the non-European majority countries on the globe, is potentially much more impactful on our future. But perhaps instead of focusing on Russia, we should start talking about the people who actually planned the thing. The 2022 National Defense Strategy document from the United States Secretary of Defense is worth a look. The document was blessed by President Biden, who was quoted in the introduction. Now, right out of the gate, it calls China, Russia, Iran, and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea threats to U.S. national security. And this threat must be met by making NATO even more powerful and nuclear capable, especially surrounding Russia. But in terms of priorities, China is the #1 target. The document even goes so far as to say that the U.S. should begin training and arming Taiwan in asymmetrical warfare, which is guerrilla warfare, against China. What should we learn? What should we learn from this document and the Pentagon think tank, the RAND Corporation strategy, published 4 years ago, planning the provocations that started this war? Well, it didn't matter what Russia did. The imperialists had a plan of action that was determined to cause war by any means. But it's understandable for the confusion, because censorship by the Pentagon and social media platforms controlled by the State Department keep vital information out. Sometimes you just have to go there. In the city of Rubizny in the Donbass region, I arrived at a shelter to interview folks who were housed there to escape the shelling of their apartments by tanks. In fact, there was a story in one of the only media outlets allowed to exist in Ukraine today, the Euromaidan Press, about the shelter in Rubizny that I visited. The Euromaidan Press is an NGO partly funded by the U.S. Intelligence's National Democratic Institute, the British Embassy in Kiev, and indirectly by the Soros Open Society Foundation, which funded regime change efforts in Ukraine. Now, they had a heart-wrenching story about a person's parents killed by a Russian soldier simply for bringing food and water to a shelter where people had escaped attacks by Russian soldiers. So Ukraine had created this shelter in Rubizny to keep people safe. Well, I visited the shelter in Rubizny about 3 weeks after this supposed incident. But the people there told me they were there because their apartments were bombed by Ukrainian tanks, not Russian tanks. And while the Ukrainians were being bombed, they said there were no Russians in sight. And they said it wasn't the Ukrainian soldiers that provided them shelter, it was the Russian soldiers and the Lugansk People's Militia that transported them to the shelter and protected them from the Ukrainian military. When I first got to Lugansk, I participated in a conference of religious leaders, Muslims, Jewish, and Christian, and the topic of discussion was how to defeat the Nazi ideology that was growing exponentially in Ukraine. Now, why is it growing so fast? Well, imagine that Biden tomorrow, he erects statues of Hitler's collaborators all over the country. Then he loans buildings for free to white supremacist organizations for the sole purpose of indoctrinating youth into fascist politics with libraries filled with books like Hitler's Mein Kampf, and a gift shop downstairs with cute little keychains with Nazi insignias on them. Then, to add icing on the cake, he abolishes every police department. We'd like that. But then he replaces them with the Klan and fascist white supremacist organizations. Now, I am not exaggerating one iota when I tell you that that is exactly what's going on in Ukraine today. I should also mention that when I was in Krymsky, also in Donbass, we visited a tuberculosis hospital that had been retrofitted for war by the Ukrainian military. Now, On the wall was a giant swastika painted on it, and next to it was the Sonderand, a symbol appropriated by the Nazis in World War II and used today by the Ukrainian Azov Battalion. When some people say that Ukraine's Nazi problem it's minor or it's in the past, they callously ignore the 10 black people who were killed at the top supermarket in Buffalo, New York by an 18-year-old white supremacist. He was wearing the emblem of the Azov Battalion, the same Sonderand I saw on that wall in Krimskaya. Now, this youth said he was inspired by New Zealander Brenton Tarrant, who killed 51 Muslims in a mosque. In his manifesto, Tarrant wrote that he was in direct contact with the Azov Battalion and was planning to go to Ukraine for military training. Now, in 2019, Time magazine interviewed a former FBI agent who admitted that 17,000 white supremacists around the world had traveled to Ukraine to get military training. Azov and its partners have used some of the billions of dollars Ukraine has received in funding and training from the U.S. since 2014 to build a very successful social media presence aimed at alienated youth. Things are indeed changing, and we must come to the realization that we can no longer allow the U.S. ruling class the luxury of pushing us over the cliff of poverty and climate disaster and World War III. You know, Dr. King said, the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government. And when he was certainly talking about the most belligerent, violent, aggressive military alliance that history has ever seen, NATO. Now, we have the power to end the war and stop the tens of billions stolen from us to fund a war that does nothing but create death, inflation, and misery. We just need to be clear on who the real enemy is. And it's not Russia. It's not China. It's U.S. imperialism and their attack dog, NATO. And it needs to be put down like the rabid dog that it is. Abolish NATO now. Abolish NATO now. Abolish NATO now. Thank you.
That was excellent. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to read a message from Alexei Albu, coordinator for the Ukrainian anti-fascist movement, Borotba. Alexei was a survivor from the Odessa massacre on May 2nd, 2014, when neo-Nazis killed 48 people. He was forced into exile and currently lives in Lugansk. All right. Thank you for the rally against the war with Russia and China, and against imperialism and NATO. I am very grateful to you for continuing to tell the truth about what is happening in the Donbass. It is very important for us that the world will know what is happening here. In the last 2 months, the shelling of Donetsk, in comparison with the summer, has intensified. The neo-Nazis want us to move our artillery. They want to force us to remove it from those areas where their defense became weak. Therefore, neo-Nazis deliberately bomb civilians. The military actions of the armed forces of Ukraine are bordering on genocide. But I am sure that everything will change soon. Good news is already coming that in some areas the defenses of the Ukrainian army have been breached. Our comrades are waiting for good news in the coming months. Please thank all the participants of the rally from the people of Donbass, from all the anti-fascists of Ukraine, and from Borotba. No Parasan. Oh, sorry, no Pasaran. There we go. Thank you, Alexei. Joyce. Oh, gotcha. Okay, gotcha. Okay. Scratch that. Berta Jabart Sisi from Women in Struggle was unable to send a video message because of the electric outages and the intensity of the struggle in Puerto Rico. In Puerto Rico. So we will read a statement from Berta as well. 1 second. Okay. I am sending greetings and solidarity from Puerto Rico to tonight's important event. Puerto Rico is suffering the ravages of privatization. Our people still suffer from lack of electricity and food, cuts to education, and people services. This is a war on Puerto Rico. Like the war on Russia, Donbass, and China, against Cuba, Peru, Nicaragua, and Brazil, where the fascists, much like the Trump forces, are trying to overthrow an elected government. A war that we can and will stop. Sorry about that. We demand the independence. We demand independence for Puerto Rico. Stop U.S. imperialism everywhere. Yeah. I just want to end by inviting everyone to attend a special webinar on January 22nd, sponsored by Women in Struggle / Mujeres en Lucha, to discuss Cuba's new family code and what we can learn. Thank you. Berta Jober Sisi, Mujeres en Lucha, Puerto Rico. Thank you.
Yeah, let's make it hot in here. Everybody stand up. Let's make it hot in here. Stand up, yes. Absolutely. Rent and food should be free, not a NATO killing spree. Say it. Rent and food should be free, not a NATO killing spree. Rent and food should be free, not a NATO killing spree. No sanctions, no bombs, no war. We won't take it anymore. No sanctions, no bombs, no war. We won't take it anymore. No sanctions, no bombs, no war. We won't take it anymore.
No sanctions, no bombs, no war. We won't take it anymore.
NATO USA, how many kids have you killed today?
NATO USA,
how many kids have you killed today? Money for war can't be the poor. Money for war can't be the poor. Money for war can't be the poor.
Money for war can't be the poor.
We do, in fact, have a few more important messages before we open to questions, comments, announcements, and a resounding singing of Solidarity Forever at the end of our program. And I just want to mention that once the organist, pianist starts singing the song, there should be no recording, okay? Thank you.
All right. Next, I'd like to call on Richie Moreno from the United National Anti-War Coalition and Bronx Anti-War Coalition. Richie is a teacher from the Bronx who has been active in community organizing for many years. Thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
I'm coming from the Bronx, New York. Anybody else here from the Bronx? Yeah. Woo! All right, Bronx in the house. All right, so sorry if this doesn't make a lot of sense. I wrote it on my way here. So here it goes. When it comes to criticisms of the dissemination of imperialist propaganda, many anti-imperialist activists focus on propaganda campaigns waged by corporate media, rightfully so. But as an anti-imperialist public school teacher in the South Bronx, I want to draw your attention to the US education system as a tool of imperialism. The purpose of education in the US is to create a society that is prepared to maintain the US empire and its hegemon, not challenge it. The indoctrination of American exceptionalism starts young and it starts early. The US ruling class not only has a grip on mainstream media, but the entire education system. Frances Fitzgerald, in her famous study of US school textbooks, summarized the core message of these books when she said, quote, the United States has been portrayed as a Salvation Army to the rest of the world, and that throughout its history, it has done nothing but dispense benefits to poor, ignorant, and deceased countries. The US has always acted in a disinterested fashion, always from the highest of motives. It gave and never took. American exceptionalism explains why our education system and media are predicated on teaching us that we are the best and that everything they tell us is the truth. When I began teaching at a South Bronx public school, I quickly realized that students are not taught to challenge narratives or how to think critically and ask critical questions. They are taught to sit down in their chairs like sponges and absorb a whitewashed version of the settler colonial state's genocidal founding history and theft and oppression of African and indigenous people in the global South. Let me be clear, the US education system is not a system of empowerment nor liberation, but a system of indoctrination and integration. Young people growing up in Harlem and the South Bronx are not taught the rich revolutionary history of local organizations like the Black Panther Party and the Young Lords. Instead, US patriotism is taught to subjected and colonized people. Huey P. Newton, in his book, Revolutionary Suicide, wrote, quote, "During those long years in Oakland public schools, I did not have one teacher who taught me anything relevant to my own life or experience. Not one instructor ever awoke in me a desire to learn more or to question or to explore the worlds of literature, science, and history. All they did was try to rob me of the sense of my own uniqueness and worth, and in the process nearly killed my urge to inquire." And because history is written by the colonizers, not the colonized, people who develop anti-imperialist analysis are an exception, not the rule. So what do we do about this? It's up to us to fight this indoctrination of the US education system and its efforts to maintain this imperialist empire. We must do all we can to fight the demonization of nations that are actively resisting Western imperialism, such as Cuba, DPRK, China, Russia, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Bolivia, Haiti, Puerto Rico, Palestine, Zimbabwe, and others. I know it's not trendy to defend China right now, nor will you earn any brownie points for defending Russia's determination to liberate the people of Donbass from Ukrainian and Western fascism. But as anti-imperialists, we have the duty and the responsibility to educate the masses because we know our schools and the media are doing the exact opposite. That is how we grow this movement. Having a conversation with your friends and family and neighbors about how the US empire relies on this demonization of other nations or these so-called enemies of freedom and democracy to justify the nearly $1 trillion annual Pentagon budget is extremely hard. I've been there. It's really hard. It's tough. And you probably won't win someone over in a single conversation due to decades of internalized propaganda from schools, media, and entertainment. But it begins with planting a seed and watering that seed until that seed becomes a flower and that flower sees the light. In order to abolish NATO and shut down AFRICOM, CENTCOM, SOUTHCOM, and the 800 plus US military bases around the world, we must help the masses realize that the US economy is a war economy and none of this would be necessary without a strategically curated list of enemies, and that's what we need to do. We need to defend these nations and get the word out, grow the movement. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, freedom is not free. We have a bucket going around. Please donate, donate, donate. The struggle continues. Okay, so now we're going to have Oronde Shakur, a member of the New York branch of the International People's Democratic Movement. Hooroo Movement, and I apologize. Ladies and gentlemen.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening. How's everybody doing? Good. A little chilly? That's all right. We're here together, and we're organizing for the right reasons, and for the right things, and for the right people. That's ourselves.
Yeah.
I'm a member of the Uhuru movement, and we work under the leadership of Chairman Omali Yesa Taylor, who some of you may know was in the news quite recently when our organization came under attack by the FBI in Ferguson and St. Louis. You know, the Ferguson where Mike Brown was assassinated by the police and left on the concrete for 4 hours in 100-degree weather.
Wow.
That's this government, and that's their assessment of who we are as African people. And anybody who have the audacity, the nerve, the courage, and determination to be free is going to come under attack, especially in the African colonized community. Because that community, as far as this system is concerned, can never be free. Because our enslavement freed Europe from its disease and poverty. Africa, the invasion and colonization of Africa built up what we call today Europe. There would be no Europe or America without the African slave. I hate to say trade, because there was no trade, there was no give and take. But you know what I mean. The colonization of African people and kidnapping us and dispersing us around the world to build this empire that's led by the U.S. government today. And I just want to read a statement from our organization around that attack and what it means. And we have a campaign called Hands Off Uhuru. And by the way, Uhuru is an African word that means freedom. And we use that word when we communicate with our comrades on a daily basis. That's the word, because we understand that freedom has to be on the minds of African people and colonized people 24/7. We want to first thank the organizers of tonight's event, saluting Martin Luther King, a day of action. And he was a person of action. And I have to confess, in the beginning, I was not a supporter of Dr. King and his nonviolent approach. But we live in a material reality, and the material reality determines who we are and how we think. And based on that condition, King changed, and he was moving away from the petty bourgeois liberalism, and he was moving to be more radical in terms of socialism, which is a word he even used himself, in terms of a system to look at as an alternative to colonial capitalism. From the Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa Counter-Offensive Committee, we salute this action honoring our African martyr, Dr. Martin Luther King. On July 29th, 2022, the FBI militarily raided 7 homes and offices of the Uhuru Freedom Movement, including the house of its founder and leader, Omali Yesa Taylor, chairman of the African People's Socialist Party. Let me go down because I got a minute. We know the FBI waged a pervasive surveillance and slander campaign against Dr. King prior to his brutal assassination on April 4th, 1968. From Marcus Garvey to W.E.B. Du Bois to Paul Robeson, Malcolm X, Fred Hampton, and many others, including Chairman Omali Yesa Taylor, the FBI has violently and brutally assaulted our leaders, attempted to destroy our movements, and to demoralize the black community fighting for freedom and self-determination. In Chairman O'Malley's official statement on the FBI text, he stated, their case against us is baseless and ridiculous. Our case against them is backed by undeniable history of centuries of ongoing atrocities against our people and our movement by the U.S. government, who have often used the FBI and the Department of Justice, and put that in quotation marks, as their political weapons against us. When they put us on trial, we will put them on trial. And in Brooklyn, New York in 1982, we had the first International Tribunal on Reparations for African people in the U.S., and there was a verdict given. And the U.S. was found guilty of the crimes of genocide against African people. And they called the chairman and all the forces that they arrested as unindicted co-conspirators. And let me say quickly, they accused us of being puppets for the Russians. That all the 60 years that we did work in building for black liberation, the Russians did it. We don't have enough sense and intelligence to make analysis for ourselves and organize for our freedoms. The Russians did it. But it wasn't the Russians that killed Mike Brown, right, or Tiana Taylor, or all the other Africans that's been murdered. It wasn't the Russians. And let me hurry up and say that the Russians didn't build their economy off the slave trade. Europe did. And we have the ability to know, like the comrade said, we know who our enemies are and we know who our friends are. And we unite with our friends against our enemies. And the U.S. government is a capitalist colonial government. And it's a parasitic political and economic system that sucks the blood from the planet Earth, from all the people on the planet Earth, stealing land, resources, life, self-determination, so that the Americans and Europeans can live high on the hog while the rest of us starve and are impoverished. But in spite of the FBI's effort, and we're waiting for the indictment to come down any day now, this is an attempt to try to force us to retreat from the things we've done. And I just want to take 1 minute to show some of the things that we were doing in St. Louis, in Ferguson. When we went in, the media was there, all these shysters and leaders was out there in front of the media. But when the media left town, so did they. The African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement stayed and has been there since then. And we have what we call the Black Power Blueprint, economic development by and for the African working class. We're building an independent workforce program for those people who's been incarcerated and will be returned home, will be trained in the culinary arts. We've taken over a lot of properties in that area that's been left dilapidated and falling down. Some we had to tear down and build. Some we're going to turn into a Uhuru Jiko commercial kitchen, a future headquarters for Uhuru Foods and Pies. You may be familiar with that. That's one of our economic institutions, and we have over 50 of those. And one of the things we did in Ferguson that we're real proud of is we built a basketball court. The children were playing in the street, in the traffic, because the government didn't feel that they was valuable enough to build a damn basketball court. And through the people and the donation from other people around the world, we took this abandoned lot and we built this state-of-the-art basketball court guarded in red, black, and green with the flag flying. And that's one of the reasons that they attacked us, because we were showing our African working class how to be self-reliant and not waiting for this government who will never, ever, like Comrade said, to give us our reparations, our due. Those things have to be taken. You know what I mean? And they got that wealth at our expense. And for us to be free, it's going to be at their expense. You know what I mean? So I have some flyers here I'm going to give out when I sit down. if you want to participate in our defense campaign, you want to get the chairman to come in and speak at your group, etc., the information will be on these flyers. And just to end, Sekou Touré said, when you are praised by the colonists, it means that you are bad for your people. When they say you are bad, it means that you are good for your people. The day that they say I'm good, that means I betrayed you. Sekou Touré. So we feel proud about the FBI attack. Thank you. Thank you for that attack. Thank you for honoring our work. And thank you for recognizing that the Black Liberation Movement is alive and well. Uhuru.
All right, next I'd like to call on Jessica Swartz from the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. FRSO has been on the front line of opposing U.S. imperialism.
Hello, I'd first like to thank Struggle La Lucha for inviting FRSO to speak and all of the organizations here today. It's important that we all come together to commemorate Martin Luther King Jr. and his legacy of fighting back. Most of us have been taught the sanitized version of Dr. Martin Luther King, that he had a dream, that he was peaceful, someone who just wanted people of all races to just get along. Oftentimes, this image was juxtaposed to Malcolm X, who was labeled as violent and a radical, as if those are bad things. And we all know that this is an incredibly watered down, false history. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. not only fought for racial justice, but for the labor and anti-war movements as well. His comments on the Vietnam War further made him a target of the US government. As a Marxist-Leninist in the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, it is of utmost importance to not just support the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but to continue his struggle in our movements today. We in the Freedom Road Socialist Organization do this in numerous ways, from being among the rank and file workers, such as the Teamsters, to protesting US interventions abroad, to fighting against police crimes and for community control of the police as part of the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, and standing with the nurses of NYSNA, who, as many of you may have heard, went on strike this week and won their fight for a fair contract and safe staffing. And too often, socialism and national liberation are seen as separate ideologies, when in fact they go hand in hand. It is revolutionaries like Harry Haywood and Claudia Jones who took the works of Stalin and other Marxist-Leninists and applied it to their own conditions, creating the theory of the Black Belt South as part of their struggle for national liberation and self-determination. The Black Panther Party used scientific socialism to fight white supremacy, and were infiltrated and attacked by the enemy because of this. Leaders like Thomas Sankara used social programs to liberate his people, only to be assassinated because of the threat he posed to US and European imperialist powers. It is when Black people and other nationally oppressed people use socialism and take on the imperialist powers of the world that they are seen as especially dangerous and need to be taken down. It is the responsibility of revolutionary white people in the working class to combat white chauvinism as well, and unite white working class people to the national liberation struggle, because without this strategic alliance of the working class with the oppressed nations of the world, we will not win. And I don't know about you all, but I know that we will win! Thank you.
Our next speaker is Michaela Martinassi. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Michaela is the Northeast Steering Committee member and co-chair of the New York International League for the People's Struggle, ILPS.
Hello,
Good evening, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Michaela, and I'm speaking on behalf of the International League of People's Struggle. It is an honor to be here with such incredible speakers, and I hope to join the chorus of voices honoring Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s powerful and timeless legacy. ILPS is an alliance of organizations around the world that have united to fight against one of the most insidious and violent enemies that we face today, imperialism. Yeah. Imperialism is responsible for the destruction of land. It's responsible for genocide, poverty, and famine all over the world. It is vicious. However, imperialism is also the catalyst of people's resistance. There is nothing as strong or as powerful as people uniting against the many-headed beast that is imperialism on a global scale. It is exceptionally pertinent to think and learn from Dr. King's long history of mobilizing people in the United States. Not only did he mobilize the masses against racism and champion labor struggles, but he also was a staunch supporter of the anti-war movement. I actually want to reference the same speech that Margaret Kimberly referenced earlier. It's called Beyond Vietnam. In there he says, perhaps the more tragic recognition of reality took place when it became clear to me that the war was doing far more than devastating the hopes of the poor at home. It was sending their sons, their brothers, their husbands to fight and to die in extraordinarily high proportions relative to the rest of the population. We were taking the black young men who had been crippled by our society and sending them 8,000 miles away to guarantee the liberties in Southeast Asia, which they had not found in Southwest Georgia and East Harlem. What Dr. King zeroed in on in this speech is that war abroad means fighting for freedom in countries that were already free before the U.S. ever set foot there. It means fighting for the freedom that oppressed people here in the U.S. had yet to experience. Now, close to 60 years later, what Dr. King said in that speech still rings true. And the cries of those affected by U.S. imperialism at home and abroad is loud and deafening. U.S. imperialism today looks like the continued embargo on Cuba that forces them into stifling poverty. It looks like the sanctions on Venezuela, Syria, Iran, and countless other countries that is just as violent as troops on the ground. Imperialism today is supporting fascist dictators like Bongbong Marcos in the Philippines, or aiding and supporting coups in democratically elected governments. It is also holding debts over independent nations' heads so they cannot fully have their own autonomy, like in Puerto Rico and in Haiti. U.S. imperialism looks like President Biden giving $3 billion a year to Israel to occupy and genocide Palestinians. And it looks like the $50 billion that Congress is going to be giving fascists in Ukraine to fight war against Russia. And it looks like the NYPD's budget of $11 billion to continue to kill black and brown people right here in New York City. Absolutely despicable that President Biden can give out billions for war when the people at home don't have jobs, are saddled with medical and student debt, can't afford housing because prices are skyrocketing. Thank you. Actually, inflation is so high that in some parts of the country, a dozen eggs cost $9. So how do we stop wars abroad and the violence here at home? Well, to quote that same speech from Dr. King, he says, "The war in Vietnam is but a symptom of a far deeper malady within the American spirit. And if we ignore this sobering reality, we will find ourselves organizing clergymen and laymen concerned committees for the next generation. We will be marching for these and a dozen other names, attending rallies without end, unless there's a significant and profound change in the American life and policy." And I think the last part is really important. We will be
continuing to march for countless countries and attending countless rallies unless there is a significant and profound change in America. I know I'm speaking to a room of organizers and fighters. I'm speaking to people well-versed in theory and the ideas of change and mobilization. However, as we're in a new and heightened period of people's resistance all over the world, we must remain vigilant against the enemy. Because as the people's movements swell to face the challenges of imperialism, fascism, racism, and bigotry, the enemy will be ready to strike back as well. That's why as ILPS, we not only fight against imperialism, but we are fighting against counterinsurgency, we're fighting against surveillance, we're fighting against political repression. So when we ask you to join the fight against imperialism, we're also asking you to join the fight to protect our communities, our fellow organizers, and activists against this repression. We must stand together to fight the enemy. We have a massive and tumultuous battle ahead of us. Let us lean on each other, let us lean on solidarity, let us win this war as one. Long live the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. Long live international solidarity. Thank you.
Let's give another hand for all our amazing speakers tonight. Thank you all very much. So, how are y'all feeling? Do y'all think we can do a Q&A tonight? Do you folks want to do that? Are we all too cold? Yeah.